We're almost in the bubble, the real bubble, right?
We were talking, do we really need these, or can we put cheap plastics or nothing there because they're already protected?
I think we should put the plastics in them.
Okay, so just talk to Farron and then we'll get rid of these.
Yeah, so we want to go here.
Yeah, just down this on the sides, I think, not in the front, just the sides.
Yeah, because you won't be able to hear otherwise.
Yeah.
And call the meeting to order. Our clerk this morning will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. I'd like to ask for a procedural motion to proceed in camera. Moved, Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Ms. Gurry, we have the in-camera meeting, which I'm calling to order. Thanks very much. I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Finance and Audit Committee back to order. And we have the introduction of late items, Ms. Guri.
Thank you, Worship. For late items today, we have Mr. Darren and Bob Moss to present regarding the Community Connect pilot project update for Council.
Very good. I'd ask for a motion for approval of the agenda. Moved, Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favour? Any opposed? Motion carries. A motion for adoption of the minutes. Moved, Councillor Hemmens, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favour? Motion carries. We're going to have a public presentation from KPMG and then the Moss delegation. I would just say to all of Council, please, this is a day for information more than debate, please. We have a very full agenda, and we will have that opportunity in future to talk about all of these items which are going to play a role in the budgeting process which is underway. We don't have the year's final figures obviously yet, so I'm asking you to show more restraint than you usually do, simply to enable us to get through this. As you know, we have several other meetings scheduled in the very near future, and there's a lot of information as we work through this process. So, having heard that little warning, if I am a bit short with people this morning, it's because I'm going to try and keep this rolling along, so forgive me. I think we're going to Moss Jr. first, are we? No, we're going to KPMG, sorry. Ms. Bates-Emer, are you with us?
Yep, I'm still here. Do you want me to be on video?
Please.
Okay. Hi. So can I just please clarify if you would like me to fully present my plan again, or just open it up for questions, considering you've all received the report?
We need you to present the plan again,
okay.
Please.
Okay. So the audit team this year consists of myself as audit partner, Sarah Burden, senior manager, and then Lenora Lee will be our quality review partner for the year. I can confirm that we're independent, and the fees we estimate charging are consistent with our audit proposal. The materiality to be used in the audit this year is consistent with that of last year, which is $3.7 million, 2.3% of total expenses. In a not-for-profit environment, we drive materiality off of the gross benchmark. That's where we're using total expenses. The auditing standards let us be within a range of 0.5 to 3% of total expenses, and we're at the 2.3. This number, the 3.7 million, is to represent the level of error that might change a user's decision when looking at the financial statements, and that would be the maximum level of error before we would have to qualify our audit opinion. With a materiality of 3.7 million, we are reporting to the committee any errors we find throughout our audit procedures greater than 185,000. In terms of our audit approach, in the identification of significant risks, there's only one significant risk associated with the audit, and that's the risk required by professional standards to identify fraud risk for management override of control, which we address through our journal entry testing, looking at estimates and significant unusual transactions. This is nothing specific to the city. Like I said, it's required by professional standards and is a risk that remains in all audits. In terms of annual inquiries, we are required to inquire of management and the audit committee of any awareness of fraud or fraud concerns to bring to our attention at this stage. I'll open up for anybody to make any comments.
Not seeing any.
Okay. In terms of our audit approach, so we've identified significant accounts where we focus our procedures. Significant accounts are those that we consider could contain a material error. The significant accounts, or sort of areas of focus in the audit of the city's financials, are the tangible capital assets, salaries and benefits, cash and investments, revenue and receivables, and expenses and payables. The approach that we take to auditing these areas is consistent with the prior year, and there hasn't been any changes in our plan procedures. COVID-19 has obviously had an impact on the city in terms of operations and the financial results. So due to this, we need to get a clear update, understanding of any changes in internal controls as a result of COVID-19, and consider whether or not they would change our audit approach. At this point, we're not anticipating there would be any significant changes in internal controls, as management has been able to be on site and process transactions as they typically would have pre-pandemic. The impact of COVID on the balances and transactions for the year will impact sort of where we're doing analytical procedures. So getting a very clear understanding of where COVID has impacted operations is important this year. We also anticipate there will be a note regarding COVID as to the impacts, and then just sort of any disclosure around future uncertainties due to COVID, as we expect that COVID impacts will carry on into the new year. We are planning to perform our audit remotely, as we've been doing for probably the past 8 months during this situation. We have a secure file transfer site that we set up to protect financial information that the client or the city will provide to KPMG, and we don't have any concerns there with sharing of files. There's one new auditing standard for the year around auditing of estimates, which just will require a little bit more work on our end to audit estimates. The estimates in the city's financials, or the significant estimates, are the estimates for employee future benefit liabilities and the estimated useful life of tangible capital assets. And then just to make you aware, the Public Sector Accounting Standards Board has pushed out the adoption of the earliest upcoming standards by a year. So those would have been asset retirement obligations and revenues. They've been pushed out a year. So where you were to adopt them for your 2022 year end, it'll be the 2023 year end for asset retirement obligations. Thank you. That concludes what I wanted to present regarding our plan.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions from council. Is there anything staff wishes to add?
It wasn't fast on my button, sorry.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick one. With everyone working remotely now, does that lower our audit costs at all?
We don't anticipate that it will.
Okay, I'm just asking.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your attendance this morning via Zoom. And if no comments from staff, then we can move on to item 6B. And it's the younger Moss, Darren, who's going to present this morning. Is that correct, or is it? Father's nodding sagely. It's glad to see there's still respect for a bit of gray hair. Good morning and welcome.
So I'm going to do a two-part presentation for you. The first part will focus on an update on the pilot project of Community Connect. The second part will focus a bit on possible steps forward, next steps, and what that might look like. So thank you guys for your time. In June, we sat down and we had a chat about how to take a more collaborative approach as a combination of property owners and city to try to take a more cohesive a strategy towards neighborhood security and safety and pride of place. We moved forward on that project, and that has developed into Community Connect, and that has been working well in partnership with Old City Quarter and the Safety Alliance. So when we set that up, we had a couple of initial goals on the project. We wanted to make it collaborative and to take innovative and brave steps as a neighborhood. We wanted to make sure downtown occupants were heard and felt supported. We wanted to create a single spot where people could reach out to for support, whether it be for safety or cleanliness. And we wanted to implement some private safety officers to be on the streets to provide that support to the neighborhood. We wanted to be doing regular cleaning of the streets. That was accomplished through a partnership with the John Howard Society. And we decided we would run a 6-month pilot to see what we could accomplish and what the impacts were. We wanted to make sure this program developed solutions that were light and scalable so that they could be adjusted and didn't rely on many permanent positions. And we wanted to make sure it was developed in partnership with City, RCMP, Old City Quarter, and the neighborhood. The start date was targeted for July 21. Since that date, the group has been led by a couple of property owners and the Old City Quarter, and we've been able to implement the following strategies. We have an incident tracking app that basically tracks all incidences with GPS coordinates and categorizes them by type and sort of severity. We've implemented a call center. It's a one-stop call center, a Canadian call center that allows callers to call in and report incidences. That's been through numerous iterations, trying to make sure it's as receptive as possible to hearing people's concerns while getting the information we need. We've created a brand for Community Connect. So we worked with Array, and they donated much of their time to develop a brand. We've secured a domain. We've done brochures and pamphlets for handouts, and we've created a landing page. We have implemented safety patrols, so 7 days a week since July 1st, there have been safety patrols out in the response area. We've also implemented cleanup patrols, so 7 days a week again, minus some days when there was some smoke issues going on. There's been cleanups walking through the neighborhood and doing cleanup for a couple hours a day. We've been meeting monthly with staff and our CMP, community policing, and our safety officers to realign, sort of update and make sure things are moving along in the direction we want them to head. We reinforced the idea of what a safety officer should be. So we started off by hiring a safety contractor, a security contractor. We had some discussions with them about dispute resolution, how we want to have the conversations moving. And then we've augmented that with some sharps training, and they're cleaning up as they go now and trying to sort of round out that role so it's not just a straight security, but also sort of a safety officer role. We've had lots of conversation with stakeholders. This is probably the part that has me most excited, the last 6 months I've seen a lot of conversations both with business owners, with not-for-profits, with health and housing, and just brainstorming to try to get up to speed, because I think property owners were a little behind on the conversation. So that's been really enjoyable and really insightful. So thankful to everybody who donated their time to help bring us up to speed. And we hosted a one-day charrette in partnership with United Way. So a couple weeks ago, we had a group of 10 people get together and just brainstorm what action items might look like in the short to medium term and how property owners and Community Connect might play a useful role in implementing some of those. And so we had a great discussion and didn't find the silver bullet, but we did have more learning, and that informs today's discussions. Actual data that's come out of this: safety patrols have been in place since July, cleanup patrols since August. Incident reporting app has been running since August. The call center took a bit longer to get up and running, so it's been going since September. The way the app tracks incidences, there's sort of a cleanup, personal interaction, and an other, and a property patrol report. Today I'm going to report on the personal incident reports. We break them into 7 different categories: suspicious vehicles, crime in progress, suspected criminal intent, active drug use, intimidating behavior, loitering, and other. By far the strong majority of these interactions are people trying to find a place to stay and being asked politely to move along. At the start of the program, those interactions were a point of high friction. I think it was a change, and over the last month or so, those interactions have become much more standard. So people are working and understanding it as they're approached, the people are moving along, and while not an ideal solution by any stretch of the imagination, it has become much more civil in its approach and how the conversations are going. In total, our safety patrols respond to over 500 incidences in the August to mid-November response so far, and continuing. I would say that on average, we're down to about 5 incidents a day, a night, and it's, like I say, it's been trending the way you would hope it would trend in the conduct of the conversations, not necessarily in any great wins as to how to get to that solution that we're all looking for. On a funding update side, we originally budgeted a total of $195 for the 6-month pilot project, 58 of which was property owners, 136 was the city. Currently, we are projecting to be a little below that, so 53 and 123 for 176. As of the end of October, we're about 20% below our expected budget, so we should be aligned with that. Part of the reason is the delay it took to get things up and running. Part of it is some efficiencies we've found as we've gone through the processes. One of the realities of this project, and always going to be a challenge, is it's relying on a few volunteers at the top to bring property owners on side and commit some of the merits of this program. I think we've had wonderful success at that, but it hasn't been unanimous. Certainly there's property owners who don't see the benefit in this kind of a program and see that it should be more a government level solution. But to date, we've had, of the properties that we were targeting, which excludes residential, we've had 47 of 58 come on board, so 81%. And by assessed value, about 50,000 of 58,500, so about 85% of property owners came on board for this pilot project. So a really strong showing, considering it was relying on kind of 4 volunteers at the top to stir the pot and see if people would come on board. Important to touch base on why people didn't come on board, though. Number one was the monthly cost is too high. We set a target, and then we went out and we chatted with them. Most people were willing to put some money forward, but couldn't afford a sustained amount in the amount of the pilot project. They want to be part of a solution. They don't just want to be part of a stopgap. So many of the larger property owners want to play a more active role in the solution. Once we can come up with action items that they can get behind, they understand that some form of safety patrol and pride of place is a really important piece of the puzzle, but they didn't feel it was the only piece. And so they resisted being part of just a piece that was doing that. There was frustration around the fact that it moved so quickly that they weren't involved ahead of time. So a lot of our conversations came around the fact that you should have asked us first. Once we had time to sit down with people and explain why it moved so fast with the COVID response, we got through those, but it was a bit of a reaction to that. And we've heard quite loudly that more safety patrols are required if we want to bolster it. Whether that's achievable or not, but that's definitely one of the pieces we've heard. Lessons learned, there's been lots of them. The pilot program has seen and had a good positive effect from the property owner and business owner's point of view for improving the safety in the area. Important to note that safety is perceived from all sides, so the perspective we're talking about is the business owners and property owners. Nighttime securities are discouraging illegal activities. We're seeing a little less of that, and we're getting comments from tenants that they feel safer in their apartments and their buildings. However, morning and daytime is a requested theme. As businesses occupy, they like to see some support and hear some support and feel they can reach out. That hasn't been the straight focus of Community Connect to date. We've played with it. We've played with ours, and we're playing with them again starting today to try to respond to the property owners' asks in that regard. I think this one's important. Any meaningful strategy around homeless will require collaborative and compromise between all stakeholders. Property owners are critical partners, but just a partner in this. My dad, Doug, Monica, and myself are happy to be part of that discussion as for property owners, and we're happy to try to bring more property owners on. But important to remember that what we say today isn't representative of all property owners in downtown. I think it's an important piece that we bring as many property owners to the table as we can to be part of this conversation and to participate in possible solutions. Security needs to remain a focus. but creative, supported housing options are critical. Every time we got into a good conversation in the last 6 months about how to partner with not-for-profits to reinforce strategies moving forward, we came up against a wall. And it's about how you respectfully ask people to move on without somewhere to move them on to. And we went through an iteration where we tried to envision a private safety officer with a not-for-profit care provider, and we go to partway down that road and everybody be excited, and we say, why would someone want to become onto that role when they aren't sending them anywhere? So you're trying to get an engagement from a group that is going to feel a lot of compassion towards the people they're working with, and until there's a more cohesive solution to point people towards, we're pushing a kind of a wet rope. So it's important to keep that as a forefront conversation piece. We believe safety needs to be a downtown-wide initiative, because anything we do that isn't that leaves some properties unsupported. And it doesn't leverage the ability to take more properties and participate in the solution. So the cost per property goes up as you shrink the area. We think that there's a lot of potential for targeted initiatives to better utilize volunteer efforts. There's lots of communities around North America that have great success in leveraging volunteers against specific initiatives. And so we think there's a role that we might be able to help with in that moving forward. And this one's kind of an important one. If there's to be a future for Community Connect, it needs to be based on a special area levy, so that all property owners are participating without having to leverage the volunteer conversations one-on-one multiple times to convince people that it has to happen. It's just not cohesive enough and stable enough. So that's a quick summary of what we've done to date. The next steps, the preface on that is, this is our presentation without the benefit of some conversations with staff of what the next steps might look like. And so our recommendation at the end of this is going to be to engage in those detailed conversations and dovetail them with other initiatives that are going on through the downtown core. Key objectives would be to continue to mitigate negative impacts of the homeless population on business owners and tenants while supporting housing solutions that are developed. So we'd like to be active in those conversations and remain active in those conversations. Keep property owners engaged as stakeholders in strategies, especially supportive housing solutions. I think that there's an energy that property owners can bring to that table and a voice to help in site selection and all those difficult conversations that is important. Extend Community Connect to cover all of downtown. I think we think that there's a scalability efficiency and a need to do that. It would become a not-for-profit society run by a volunteer board. It would require a full-time administrative staff to get to that size. It just wouldn't be sustainable for us to keep running this off the side of our desk if we're going to do the whole downtown core. And if we start to leverage volunteers and specific initiatives, I think that staff time is a very valuable piece to move it forward. Encouraging the volunteer engagement and the efforts necessary to implement that special area levy to ensure all property owners are participating. One of the realities of a special area levy is it takes time, it's complicated, and takes a lot of moving around and ammo to get people on board. So what we've done is we've set up a transition time frame for this. The first period is the current pilot program that's ongoing right now, ends in December, at the end of December. The next 6 months, while we get ready for the tax season starting, or the tax notices that go out for July 1, we've called that the transition time frame. During that time frame, we're proposing to carry on services as we are now in a slightly scaled down version. And then during that time, we'd add the volunteer effort necessary to reinforce that special area levy and try to make that a reality. And then starting July 21, there'd be a 3-year stabilized model based on that levy. A couple key points is during the transition period, we would want to make sure that we were gauging property support. And then also that we, as we work through that process, we leave the sort of selected process we have for security patrol, and we go to a tender process to make sure that all interested participants have the opportunity to participate and put their best foot forward. Between the two phases, the transition phase and the stabilized phase, just a side-by-side comparison, the response area would be, as is now, the old city quarter versus the full downtown. Nighttime security patrols would go from 1 to 4. Daytime safety patrols would be 1 to 1 again. That one is focused on being more of a vehicle-based response during the day, so that if people have concerns, they can call in and people can get there. We just can't get to the staffing levels we need to have full-time daytime foot patrols all throughout downtown, but we want to provide some level of support. Dedicated cleanup patrols. This is one we need to discuss as a group as we move forward, but right now we propose not to have dedicated cleanup patrols, but to reinforce our safety patrols to do cleanup as they work around the streets. We just needed to find a way to keep this as sustainable as possible financially, so that was the early decision we made. Administration support on the first phase, transition, would be volunteer, and the second phase would be a staff position to a board of volunteers. All safety patrols would have 2 safety patrollers. We wouldn't be asking people to patrol at night without being at least in pairs. 8-hour shifts, and the daytime patrols would be a vehicle-based response. Budgets for the transition phase scaled down a bit from where we had originally proposed the pilot program to about 183. And then the stabilized project for the entire downtown is about just over 1.1 million a year. The different pieces really isn't a huge piece except for administration and the add of the staff. The nighttime safety patrols are a straight scale up. The daytime safety patrols are a straight scale up. The interesting piece in the stabilized project is we proposed that there would be a $100,000 project startup capital, so that it's an ability for this group to leverage creative strategies and to perhaps take on some of those strategies in partnership and just seed some projects, do some investigation and explore those and carry them forward. And an ability for, of course, city funds to be leveraged with property owners' funds to get there. The cost-sharing structure that we're proposing to be considered for the transition period is 20 and 80 versus 30 and 70 of the first one, and basically for 2 reasons. One, property owners have confirmed they can't sustain the one that they're doing now, and 2, this brings the cost per property owner for the transition period in line with the long-term stabilized cost, so it would be at the same range as the long-term strategy. So, and then the long-term strategy, we're proposing a 50-50 split, so 50% by levy, 50% by city funds, and creating a more stable structure based on that. Just for information, the stabilized version for the property owners works out to about 82 cents per $1,000 of assessed value, based on the downtown appraised value, or assessed value of $704 million. For today, what we're hoping you will consider for a recommendation is that the Finance and Audit Committee would recommend to Council to direct staff to, 1, work with Community Connect and other key downtown stakeholders to develop options for a broader downtown safety and security initiative starting in July 2021, and report back in very early 2021 for Council's consideration. And 2, to fund a grant of $147 to Community Connect to support the continued enhanced neighborhood safety program between January 1 and June 30th of next year. So this will be more just an interesting parting thoughts, and this is just more accumulation of my thoughts over the last 6 months of discussions. Community Connect is one partner taking action to find solutions, but it's not the solution. There's a ton, as you guys know, of very active, very dedicated people in the community working towards these challenges, and we want to be part of it, but we're not the only one. The other one's more of a philosophical one. Action and inaction are both decisions. They're both choices. We personally believe that taking action, observing, and adjusting is the more amenable solution than to take inaction and suffer some of the consequences. A couple of the ones that have come up pretty obviously to me anyways in the last 6 months of discussions are on the social side. The macro level pressures that are causing homelessness across North America aren't going away in the near future, especially in the region we live. We live in a beautiful part of the world who increasingly is going to be attractive around the world. And we have yet to take the great strides we need to create an economy that can create incomes that match the growth that's going to be by that outside drive. So I think it's safe to say that unless we find creative solutions, we're going to see more of our youth and community suffering from homelessness homelessness and the associated risk of homelessness. I think we're going to see a continued degradation of our safety and experience of our downtown core, which is really indicative of how our city is going to feel. And on the economic side, there's only one way to value a property when it comes to the commercial properties, and that's basically on the rents paid by your tenants. And that's directly linked to the experience of your tenants and occupants. And so if we do experience a degradation of that experience and property owners go down, it has a very linear effect on property value. So this is just an arbitrary 5% decrease in assessed values due to degradation of experience. And that's equal to about $400,000 a year in lost property tax downtown on the same assessed values that we're talking about. So this slide was just a chance to share some thoughts and nothing more than that. So that was the end, but I really, again, thank you guys for coming on board to trial this pilot project. Hopefully that it's achieved some of the initiatives we set out to achieve, and we can carry it forward to something that's fruitful and useful. So please, any questions you have, happy to try to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moss. Appreciate the time this morning. Councillor Sturley and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Moss, with regard to the special area levy, is it applicable to all property types, including residential, or just commercial and industrial?
The intent is for all property types. We think that residential is very much a part of this solution as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Just a question on the night patrols, because it was my understanding that they pulled them for a while due to safety concerns. Has that been addressed?
They never stopped. No, I'm not quite sure how that whole conversation got started, but we adjusted them. So we've been providing nighttime security all the way through, but we moved it around during the night. So we moved it up as far as 5 p.m. to 2 a.m. And then we've had it from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. And now we've just adjusted it to 2 a.m. to 10 a.m., trying to play with different hours to see how our property owners are reacting to it. But there's been nighttime security all the way through. They didn't pull off for safety. The one safety concern was we did about 2 nights where we asked a single safety patrol officer to patrol the street, and that led to one incident where they didn't feel comfortable. So then we went back to doubling up, and that's been 2 ever since.
Thank you. And then I have some just general comments after when you're ready for those.
Sorry?
And some general comments when you're ready for those. I would just like to refer the whole situation to a GPC meeting where we have all the stakeholders there, the police, everybody, because I think this is a big ask. $1 million is a lot of money, you know, even because that buys you 4, almost 5 police officers per year, which to me is much more effective use of tax dollars. So I think we need to have a really more fulsome discussion than at a finance and audit. I would personally like to have it at GPC where we can ask the police how they're working, other business owners how it's working. And if it's going to affect residents, we certainly need to have resident input. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Bonner, I must admit I'd be looking for a staff report, that's for sure. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Through to Mr. Moss. One of your slides referred to incidents happening in that area there. Have you been chatting with the RCMP to see if their response is in that area have gone down because of the work that you're doing, or any even anecdotal? I'm just trying to think of if they're saving money, can we move some of that over into this, that sort of thing?
So one of the goals of this program was to allow RCMP to focus on higher level tasks. And so we have been meeting monthly with Derek and community policing as well. And I think they have both indicated that while very short term, so far they have seen fewer calls, but it's not of the magnitude that's going to alleviate one staff person kind of thing. But they certainly have been working in partnership with their safety patrollers. So the safety patrollers will deal with 90% of the incidences. 10% of the time they'll call out the RCMP to mitigate a more significant concern. And that collaboration has been working really well.
I'm more looking at in the future. We are hiring 3 RCMP officers over the next 4 years each year. If we can mitigate crime in the downtown area to a certain extent, we may not need one of those officers, as an example.
Yeah, and my thoughts on that are that what Community Connect is proposing to be is a safety patrol, and it's intended to support property owners. I personally believe that there's a lot of merit in RCMP having time to focus on the higher level tasks. So not to be responding to every incident that gets called in, but to be able to focus on the crime and crime prevention and getting ahead of some of the larger challenges that are in the downtown core. So I wouldn't want to see Community Connect replace an RCMP position. I would like to see them work in parallel so that the efforts can be focused where the skill sets are best focused.
Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, recognizing the need for restraint, and we're not debating this today, but I do want to thank Mr. Moss and his group. I recall when you came to us for funding for the pilot project, stating that I believed in council helping those that help themselves. And I think that your organization has been proactive in trying to find at least some temporary, not solutions, but ways to improve the situation for downtown businesses, at least in the Old Quarter Association. So I applaud that. And I'll leave other comments for future debate. But I did have a question, and it relates to something that's further down on our agenda today, and that is the formation of a new Downtown Business Improvement Association or area. And you're talking about expanding the scope of what you're doing to include all of downtown. So have you had any conversations with the merchants of the actual, what we'd call the downtown area, the commercial street area, and those that are behind the new or the revised Downtown Business Association?
So we've been in communication with Kim a couple of times, but we haven't approached the property owners any further than that, because until we know that it's a council-supported objective, it's really difficult to go forward and spend the energy and effort to gauge that. I think the goal would be to have that conversation in the early year once we had a better framework of how this safety program would dovetail with the BIA request. And for that, we need to go back and talk to staff, which is what the motion's trying to get to, that we can get a really cohesive discussion around how those two would dovetail together so that we're not duplicating services and at the same time augmenting each other's roles.
Thank you. If I may, through His Worship, that's my concern, that there needs to be a coordinated effort there rather than duplicating services or working in silos instead of collaboratively. So I'm sure that's on your scope.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Hemmings.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a general point, more for my colleagues, and that's that the work of the Health and Housing Task Force will be coming to Council soon. And I think Dawn and I have tried to convey that work is really high-level system redesign work. We have millions of dollars coming into the community uncoordinated, and looking for short-term solutions while that systemic challenge is present is a Band-Aid, I think, is a Band-Aid solution. So what the Health and Housing Task Force is trying to do is look at the bigger system. How do we work together? How do we coordinate those millions of dollars coming in? There is no doubt in my mind that the business community will have a role to play in whatever recommendations come down. And I guess I just want to express my gratitude, because the Health and Housing Task Force is not, I don't believe, going to give us these short-term, immediate actions. And so as we're doing that bigger system redesign work, we're going to continue to need these projects that work on the ground and directly with community members. So thank you for inviting both Dawn and I to the charrette. It was interesting, and I felt we spent a lot of time defining the problem because it's so huge and it's so difficult and quite impossible. There are no best practices in terms of solving this, and there are no solutions. So expressing my gratitude, and also I just want to share that one of the ideas that emerged at the charrette is Community Connect has security, and I hate to call it security because I know you guys are trying to frame it differently, and I feel it requires a different framing. However, there is an opportunity as we're reorganizing the system to pair some of our social service provider resources with a program like this. So as people are being encouraged to, move along or whatever we're doing, they're also made available resources to them through an outreach worker, through, an opportunity to connect those people into systems that will support them. So I just want to thank you. I think it's been an interesting pilot. I didn't know if I supported it in the beginning, but I'm grateful you're here, and I'm grateful for the statistics updated. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rudolph, some words of wisdom.
Your worship, just process-wise, recognizing this is finance and audit and it's not GPC. Well, the two recommendations have two different paths. I think first, the one for the recommendation number 2, which is the $147,000 bridge financing or transitional funding, will have to be a consideration as part of your budget deliberations starting in the 30th. I think be on that list. And secondly, the second part of it is to unpack this and sort through it with all the relationships and input from the RCMP and bylaws and all those folks and other stakeholders. Will take a little different time and path, and not sure just how quickly that can be put together. I mean, we're in the middle of budget process. We have scheduled 14 meetings with council between now and Christmas. It's a very busy time for staff. So we'll be certainly looking at probably a GPC early in the new year. The earliest we could do that is January 11th. I think is the next scheduled GPC. But so just to note that unless you feel otherwise, we would be anticipating this to be on the list of topics for your budget discussions starting on the 30th. And secondly, the final budget doesn't come in until May. So there is time to digest things and sort through things to add changes or so forth for a myriad of issues probably after this provisional budget is set, hopefully before Christmas. So there's two different paths forward in my estimation.
Councillor Hemmens?
Thank you. Mr. Moss, would you be able to bring up the recommended motions again?
Maybe. Nope.
No. Okay. There was, the first one related to staff continuing to work with Community Connect, and then the second was related to funding.
The first one was to try to, as Mr. Rudolph is describing, to try to better bring together the BIA, RCMP, and our request so that we can come back in early 21 with a more cohesive strategy. The second one was for the transition funding to keep us going during the 6 months while that would be ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly that.
So my question to staff, so the first one seems perfectly reasonable and something we would be doing anyways because we're a partner in this. I'm not comfortable moving a motion regarding funding at this point. Is there a way to break these out? And is number 1 already going to happen whether I move it or not?
Mr. Rudolph?
Through the chair, procedurally, you could direct, let's start with the first issue, which is number 2 on this list, is because budget is imminent and you've already received your budget documents in anticipation of the budget process, is that to refer all of us, if you wish, to budget process for conversation, but specifically the ask that is impacting for a January 1 startup is this 147,000. So I think there will be a need to be having a decision on that during the budget process in order to continue with the program, because it's not funded into 2021, is my understanding. So there's a need to deal with that specific issue as part of budget process. The second could be referred, as Councillor Armstrong indicated, to a GPC for a fulsome discussion on this and how it relates to a myriad of other issues. Could mean the task force on homelessness and housing, health and housing. It could relate to the BIA initiative and other initiatives that are taking place in and around the area right now. So, so I think you could split them out or you could deal with them together. It's however you wish to deal with them. But certainly, I think the ask specifically is to have some security for funding going into the new year. So that would require some discussion as part of budget. I don't think you're under pressure for the big ask as part of this budget process, though you could go there if you wish. But I think the suggestion is maybe to refer that to a GPC early in the new year and allow all the stakeholders time to get their head around this and coalesce around a program moving forward and what the funding ask ultimately is. I'm not sure if I'm making sense on that. So they are 2 separate motions, but you could have one if you wish.
I would like to move that. staff prepare a business case for our consideration of this financial ask for our budget deliberations. Is that clear in its direction?
Mr. Rudolph.
I'm not sure we have the ability to pull that together that quickly for the $1 million ask, certainly on the 147.
The
yes.
transition funding.
Yes, we could put together a report on that for sure.
Okay.
Is there a seconder for that? Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion on that particular item? Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, I still want to put it to the GPC, and no offense, but we're hearing one perspective. So I'd like to hear perspectives from other stakeholders as well. This is a significant ask. We did get some concerns from, well, at least I did, from many people in the public that we were funding private industry security where other communities or other businesses weren't getting the same value. So I believe it needs to go to a GPC. I think it's really important that we get the police perspective, bylaws, other stakeholders, because I've heard a lot of negative stuff as well. I've heard good and I've heard negative, so I don't really want to fund something until I get the full picture. Thank you.
I think the purpose of the motion is simply to get a report so that we can consider it as part of the process, and the consideration might well be that we refer it on to the GPC, but I think it's important to get the information. I don't see them as in opposition to each other, frankly. And as Mr. Rudolph has suggested, and I think it is the wise consideration that follows in your suggestion, that this fit into a GPC. It's a fairly big ask, and candidly, I think all of us remain somewhat hopeful that the Health and Housing Task Force report will give us some guidance for a broader approach that's more effective than what's been happening to date. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. So two things. I just wanted to be clear that the motion on the floor right now for Councillor Armstrong as well is just number 2, which is the 147 to go to January 1st to June 30th. So that's what you're dealing with now. And then secondly, Councillor Brown has joined us via phone, so he is on the line as well. I just wanted to make Council aware.
Thank you. Conscious of time and the agenda, Councillor Gesselbrock, I cut you off. You wanted to say something?
Thank you. Through you, I'm supportive of a business case for the 147 bridge funding to take the program to June, I believe. Yeah, appreciate the work of this group of volunteers, and I think that the situation that we're experiencing in town with homelessness and addiction, it's not going to go away overnight, and we do have to engage in mitigation activities. And I think that key principles for me is engaging activities that's going to connect different sectors of our community together in sort of a common understanding and an approach. I think I like the orientation of looking at it more from a safety lens and a security lens. And I know that there's some issues that have been brought up by other community members that Councillor Armstrong brings up. And I think that some of those concerns can be addressed in the staff report that will come for the business case. But I think on a whole that this has been a very positive program that's led to important conversations, and I think trying to link in and integrate more groups from social services is important. And I think we'll discuss this more with the next motion, but looking at a larger integration of an approach is important, and there's going to be some key information coming from the Health and Housing Task Force and the broader systems perspective that we're going to have to work with. So I look forward to the conversations, and I appreciate the initiative of this group. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe and then Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a point of clarity. So what's on the floor is not exactly the wording that we see in front of us. If I'm understanding it correctly, the motion that we're going to vote on is whether this be a topic at our budget deliberations, and staff will have information related to it. So we're not voting to fund it today. We're just voting to have it as part of our deliberations. Thank you.
We're voting for education.
Right. Always a good thing.
Councillor Bonner.
I think I'll also be voting in favor. And as for number 1, since this is finance and audit, I think I would be bringing that forward as a notice of motion for the next council meeting. I honestly believe that much of the work that will be done in number 1 would probably be done with an arm's length entity that the Health and Housing Task Force is working with. I think they're all related. The security and in our downtown is key, and I also think getting people into houses is key, and they're both related, so I'll bring that to you.
Thank you. All those in favor? Any contrary? Motion carries. Thank you very much. I think we know where we're going. Mr. Moss, to you, the group, all of you, thank you very much. Appreciate the work. I'm conscious of your language used earlier in your report about action is better than inaction.
Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Just a question
Councillor Gesselbrock.
related to this item. So item number 1, is that something that we'll be addressing later on and brought forward maybe in another venue?
Yes.
Thanks.
All right, we're on to reports. From street troubles to the Cardena Road storm sewer. Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is an information report you have in front of you. It's just advising council of a larger than normal budget transfer, so in the interest of disclosure. So it's just to deal with an old storm drainage issue that we have. We don't have rights to discharge to private property.
Forgive the sexism, Mr. Sims. The sins of the father shall be visited unto the children. Forgive the sexism. The sins of the father shall be visited unto the children. Should have been done properly a number of years ago, and you're fixing it, so thank you.
Of course.
Unless council has any questions for Mr. Sims. Thank you very much. The next is the water main replacement in conjunction with the RDN sewer project. Again, Mr. Sims, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just briefly, this report would seek accelerating of one of the projects in the city's current 5-year capital plan of 2024. That is on Meadow Lane, and an additional funding from water reserves for Kite Way to replace and upgrade some existing, I'll call them brittle pipe water mains that will be likely affected by the replacement of the regional district trunk sewer through that area.
Like the Halliburton Street project, another good example of the city working in conjunction with the RDN and doing something sensible in the taxpayers' interest. Councillor Armstrong.
Just want to move the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Seconded Councillor Thorpe. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. And the next is Housing First rent supplements. Mr. Lindsay, I think, stepped out with the Mosses, perhaps. Ms. Bhopal Singh, can you, you going to speak to it?
Hi, Your Worship. I'm going to introduce Dave Stewart, our social planner who's prepared this report, and he will present this and answer any questions. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Stewart, welcome. Just because you're third doesn't mean we think you're third rank.
I wasn't sure if this was done, so I'm just going to make sure it's ready.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the report in front of you is mostly to inform, but also to request Council to direct up to $35,000 of funding from the Housing Legacy Reserve to the Nanaimo Region John Howard Society in order to continue the Housing First Rent Supplement Program for 2021. So what that program is, it's a program where John Howard has provided a supplement to help folks who can't meet their rent and are either at homeless or at risk of becoming homeless from staying in the house. With that, there comes some supports. What's different from this, some say supportive housing, is the folks are housed in market housing dispersed throughout the city. So it's certainly part of the dispersal model that Council's endorsed in the homeless strategy. And The $35,000 request comes from John Howard looking at the change in rents since the previous $45,000 request for 2 years. This is a 1-year request, and how that meets their demand in the market housing that they request. So I'm here to answer any questions for council if they have any based on the report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. Councillor Armstrong.
Move the recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Simmons. Does anyone wish to speak to it? And Councillor Bonner's on the list. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had an opportunity to have a chat with the John Howard Society about this program. The $35,000, as described, will be used to help people get into rental market housing. The other thing that has happened is they've received funding from the federal government, I believe, to hire a person to liaison and find more landlords for this program. That was one of the things that they were missing. As a result of that position, they'll probably be finding more places, and we'll certainly use up this $35,000 this year. My point here is I think that we should look at making this a budget item and that they get the money each year, because the need will not be going down, it'll be going up. And the reason for that is it's rather hard and cumbersome for agencies to set up grant applications and put in applications and stuff like that. And they're already stretched to the limit. If we were to just fund this out of the reserve that it's coming out of now and just make that a budget item, that would be something that would make it much easier for them in the future and less costly in terms of administration.
Thank you very much for that suggestion. I think I would want to leave it to John Howard to make that request if they think it's appropriate. Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, I do have a question. For something like this, you hear from many people that they can't afford like the damage deposit, or, you know, some renter or landlords want first and last month's rent. Would they be able to apply for this program? Or would there be a different one?
Yeah, it would really depend on their situation through the chair. Potentially, the answer is yes. So John Howard, this would be more for folks who simply can't meet their rent and have no way of paying it back. Council also heard a presentation from us a while ago regarding the rent bank.
Yeah.
That would be more for folks who need help getting in to make a damage deposit, or something they've temporarily lost their employment, and the rent bank might be a more appropriate supplement, and that would also be administered through the John Howard, which clearly has some advantages where they are able to manage folks into the appropriate program.
Thank
But
you.
absolutely, to answer your question, that's one possibility for this.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just need to state that I strongly support this program. This is exactly the type of proactive type of intervention that we need to prevent people from becoming homeless. And these are the people I have most sympathy with, that are just struggling to make ends meet and stay in accommodation. So I'll certainly be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All those in favor? Any contrary? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. The next is an update on the 2019-2020 grant application for social initiatives. And is Mr. Lindsay going to present that?
I'm
Or
not
Mr. Stewart?
going to present, Your Worship. I apologize for not being here to introduce the last item. I've never seen Mr. Sims be so quick on 2 items. So,
It was a small amount of money and we moved it through the line quickly.
the next item, I'm going to turn over to Karen Cronstels, who is our social planner here, and she's going to walk you quickly through the report.
Ms. Cronstel, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, thank you, Your Worship, Council. I'm just here to give some good news about some successful grant applications that we've had here. Obviously, we apply for money as well as doling it out from time to time. So you've received 3 reports in the past on these different initiatives I'm reporting back on. The report that you would have received with the Plan H grant, we were unsuccessful in our 2 grant applications on that one. So that's just closing the loop on the applications we'd made for the online resources for seniors and enhanced engagement for vulnerable populations during Reimagine. However, we have been able to redirect a small amount of money from some of the in-person engagement we'd budgeted for Reimagine towards supporting lower barriers for engagement with vulnerable populations. So we're still seeking to support that. We're just kind of finding new avenues to do so. Now, the next one was the Federation of Canadian Municipalities had allocated $45,000 towards Nanaimo's response to COVID and vulnerable populations. Council had directed us to work with the United Way to allocate that funding through in partnership with the Reaching Home funding that was received. So as reported out here, the United Way chose to allocate that in two ways, topping up the Indigenous funding that was given to the Nanaimo First Nations Wrapping of Blankets program, as well as the Nanaimo Aboriginal Center's My Connections program, which you may have seen the beautiful RV out at work. So those two programs got some top-up funding from that Federation of Canadian Municipalities grant, which is great because we weren't able to fully fund their asks through the initial Reaching Home funding. So that is where that money went. And then the third, very excited to announce that we were successful in our partnership grant with Nanaimo First Nations Health Department for the Community Action Initiative Community Wellness and Harm Reduction Grant. That is for a partnership where it's outlined in the attachment. Basically, we are flowing through the funding to Nanaimo First Nation Health Department for them to run a peer skills and employment program for those affected by substance use as well as COVID. And the details are all there in the attachment. We have asked the CIA if it was possible for them to use additional funding for the Wrapping of Blankets program, because that's what they've been focusing on, as well as that would have enabled them to continue longer into 2022, because the funding they're receiving through FCM and Reaching Home is only until March 2021. Unfortunately, they weren't able to offer that flexibility. We really received that grant on the basis of the application as outlined. So we are still meeting with Nanaimo First Nation about that. They are willing to continue with the program as proposed for the peer employment and skills program. It's not as much the priority as it would have been now due to COVID times, but they're happy to receive the funding. So that is what we are up to as far as receiving and allocating grants, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gronsel. Always good to hear some good news. Any questions? Thank you very much. That was quick and easy. The next is the Downtown Business Improvement Area. Ms. Legan, you're going to introduce this, and Mr. Smythe, I gather, is going to come in via Zoom, is he, or?
Your Worship, I believe he's here in person. I will check. I am going to turn it over to Ms. Mercer for items E through I. I will address J on the COVID restart at length, and I'm just going to see if Mr. Smythe is here.
Thank you very much.
If I could just, I've been in communication with Kim, and the last communication I had with him was a couple of days ago, and he said he didn't think it was necessary to come, so I don't know if he's here or not. So.
Oh, Ms. Mercer, did you receive that?
If I've spoken out of turn, I apologize.
Councillor Turley, everything is forgiven. Ms. Gurry, I'm going to assume that...
Thank you, Worship. We did not hear from Mr. Smythe either way, so if he's not here, then we would just go through with the report.
Carry on.
And he might have just been here to speak in support of it.
Yeah.
Ms. Mercer, it's your show.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. So it was my understanding that Mr. Smythe was going to be here, but I'll give you my blurb. And so in January 2020, we were approached by Mr. Smythe and with the assistance of Councillor Turley to discuss the steps involved in creating a new downtown business improvement association. So since that time, the Downtown Nanaimo Business Association has been created, and staff have worked with them to map out a proposed BIA area, and that map is included in attachment A of the report. So to date, as I mentioned, the BIA area has been identified and mapped. The term is proposed for 5 years, so 2021 to 2025, and that's pretty standard for these kinds of bylaws, and it's historically what we've done in the past with BIAs. The amount levied will increase by 1% per year in years 2 through 5 of the bylaw, and there will be no matching grant provided by the city. So what is involved in next steps is we need to determine what kind of petition should be sent, and that's what we're here to discuss today, is it a petition for or a petition against. The association needs to determine what amount they want to be levied, because they're still trying to figure that out. And once a petition, type of petition and the levy has been determined, city staff will send out the petition package to all the applicable commercial class properties in that BIA map area. If the petition is successful, council will need to adopt a BIA bylaw, and staff will levy the local service area tax to the applicable properties starting in May 2021. And how it works is we levy collect the money, and then pay it over to them in August of each year. So the two types of petitions that I mentioned are petition 4, and that can be done by a council initiative or an individual organization. And to proceed with the levy, at least 50% of the parcels in the area representing at least 50% of the assessed value of land and improvements must be received in favor of instituting the levy. A petition against can only be done by a council initiative, so an organization can't do that on their own. And to proceed with this levy, it's exactly the same as a petition 4, where you need 50% of the parcels representing 50% of the assessed values, but those petitions are in opposition. So by saying, if you don't want it, you put your petition in. If you don't, you're in essence saying you are in favor of it. From a city perspective, there's work involved with both petitions, but we are compensated with an administration fee that's paid in the first year of the levy. So staff are recommending that a council initiative petition against be used and have staff proceed with the process. So the advantages of this is this petition type has more chances of being successful for the association. The disadvantages are it's slightly more administrative work that needs to be done with this one, but in essence, both petitions require work. And there's no financial impact to the city. As I said, we levy it and pay it over, and so there's no impact to us. And so what we're asking is council determine what type of petition they would like to this BIA to proceed with.
We have a recommended motion. Are you satisfied that it encompasses what you've asked of council this morning? We're not talking, it's not as detailed as the recommendation around options, so. I'm going to assume, Ms. Gurria, we're okay on this one? The recommended motion is that staff is directed to work with the Downtown Business Improvement Association leading to the establishment of a new downtown business improvement area for a term of 5 years, and to undertake the downtown business improvement areas as council initiative.
It should have said a petition against.
Sorry?
A council, it should have said, undertake a new downtown business improvement area as a council initiative. Petition against is what the missing words are for part 2. The petition against at the end of recommendation number 2.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So I was just looking to see what words were missing, and if council wishes to move what staff recommend, if they could move the motion that is set out in the report on page 54, the option number 1 on page 55. If they could move that motion, would be better.
And Councillor Martman's moving it. Councillor Turley, you're seconding?
Yes, and I have some comments.
Please.
First of all, I apologize for not passing the information along to staff about Mr. Smythe. I assumed he had copied the email, but several reasons. Number one, if any of council are unfamiliar with the historical aspect of the downtown and the BIA, I'm quite happy to answer any questions at another time. Ms. Mercer's already indicated the financial implication of setting up the BIA with regard to the administrative fee that comes off the first check, the one that would be issued hopefully in 2021, June or July. The importance again of the negative vote, and historically it has always been a negative vote, is that a lot of the commercial property owners in the downtown area are not local residents of Nanaimo. They are out of town, and historically the response generally is not worth their while to respond, because any increase in the cost of their property is always passed along to the tenants anyway, so it's really not an issue for them. And the advantage of having a negative vote is that the big problem is if 50% of the people or 51% of the property owners with the value don't vote, then on a positive one it's defeated. So it's imperative that it be a negative vote. I thought it was interesting going through the the information with regard to the society that's going to administer the funds, being the Downtown Nanaimo Business Association. They have 3 committees earmarked. 1 is marketing and partnerships, 2 is culture and events, and 3 is safety and sustainability. So there is leeway as to what focus they want to focus on with regard to year 1 and possibly year 2, and it may well be the issue of safety and sustainability. That's up to their board to decide. And the other thing I want to point out to everybody is that the levy is for commercial and industrial properties only. It does not include city properties, residential properties, or federal and provincial properties. So unless there's any questions that I'm able to answer, that's it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Worship. It's too bad Mr. Smythe's not here. The question I actually had is on the board makeup. And I don't know if we have the opportunity to suggest changes or anything. My only concern here is that this particular area has a large cultural component to it. We have 2 museums, the art galleries, there is also the Port Theatre, and also the Nanaimo Art Gallery as well, and commercial galleries. In addition to that, there's a number of not-for-profits working out of this area as well. Just don't see them as being represented on the board at all, and so that would be a concern. But I would hope maybe Mr. Smythe is listening now and could take that under consideration. Thank you.
I'm going to let Councillor Turley respond.
Thank you, Worship. With regard to Councillor Bonner's questions, first of all, the Port Theatre would not be paying the levy because it's a city property, and also the art gallery, I believe, is a city building as well, so it would not be paying. The challenge with trying to get people, and certainly the society is open to nominations from the floor. It's not, this is just, the elections are, I think, every 2 years. It's all in the articles of their association. So it's not like somebody's grandfather in there and it's only going to be till whenever. The general experience is, unless there's an issue that is controversial, it's tough to get board members. While it'd be wonderful to have an election every time, quite often it does just, nobody's interested because everything's fine. Why would we get involved? However, if there is an issue, you can be assured that there will be a broader thing. So I don't think that's an issue at this point in time. I think we need to get it off the ground and running, and then if there are issues that come forward, then certainly those of us who know the people involved, we can have a chat with them. So,
okay, fine with me.
I can tell you, Councillor Bonner, that Councillor Turley and myself go back to being trustees of the original association way back when, and if the cultural community is anxious to step forward and work on the board, they'll be more than welcome, I'm quite sure. If we can do this fairly quickly, Councillor Gesselbrock, please.
You mean quickly give my comments? I just wanted to thank Councillor Turley for his work getting this moving. He's been a long time business champion for the downtown, and I know that I campaigned to get the BIA back up and running, and I think that we're in great need of more and more tables of collaboration in this community, and this is definitely one of them. So yeah, just a big thank you to Jim, and also I think it's important to thank the Chamber of Commerce. That the downtown business owners are a very busy group, and it's sometimes difficult to get together, and the Chamber stepped up to help provide some administrative support. And it's been the vision of this BIA to be downtown merchant-led. So I'm happy to see the board of directors that have stepped up to the plate, and looking forward to get this initiative going. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Briefly, I just want, for the benefit of our viewers or listeners, to understand that, first of all, as you've indicated, and please correct me if I'm not correct, Ms. Bonner, Ms. Bonner.
Now that is a
staff. Now, what was I going to say? Oh, first of all, the city is not involved in funding There is no grants being given, at least at this point. We're simply administering the legal process of the vote.
That is correct. Yes.
Thank you. And secondly, if we approve option number 1, that does include the negative, what's the wording, petition against?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. So if I may, just a quick follow-up comment that I'm really personally pleased that the DNBA has been formed or reformed, and potentially they're going to be an important partner to the city in what we're trying to do to improve our downtown area, of course. So I would encourage this organization at some future date, when they're comfortable in their roles, to come to council and make a presentation telling who they are, what their initiatives might look like, what their priorities are, and suggest ways that maybe council can support them. Not necessarily financially, but in other ways. Thank you.
I'll be really quick. I understood the, Ms. Mercer? I understood the frustration that led to the vote. I was present as MLA at that meeting, and I was extremely disappointed to see it disappear. I have to say, somewhat critically, I can only try and imagine how much easier it would have been to deal with COVID and to deal with the increase in the homelessness population, the mental health and addictions crisis that fills our street if this had never disappeared several years ago. And I think this is a timely reminder of why it's important for communities and neighborhoods to organize, and the benefit that flows from that when they can speak with one voice. So I'm delighted to see this happening. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Thank you very much. And thank you likewise to Councillors Turley and Gesselbrock and others who played a role in this. Next is Reserve Policy Update. Ms. Mercer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So on July 22nd, 2019, Council adopted the Reserves Policy that was presented by staff, and that policy and corresponding report are in attachments A and B to the report. So at that time, we created 3 financial stability reserves to mitigate risk and provide funding for future costs. So for example, the General Financial Stability Reserve was created to mitigate risks arising from lower than anticipated revenues or unplanned expenditures to maintain city services. So that's the general intent of those reserves. So a minimum balance was determined for these 3 reserves based on best practice. So 60 days of the prior year's budgeted operating expenditures were used for the general and water funds, and 45 days was used for the sewer fund. And if the balance dropped below these minimum balances, a repayment plan would be triggered and need to be implemented into the next financial plan. So the policy also spoke to, or speaks to, maximum balances to ensure the reserves do not grow beyond their intended purpose, but currently we have no maximum set in the policy. So in 2020, the COVID pandemic hit, and the city was greatly impacted. The operations of the city were greatly impacted. Now, COVID-19 is the exact intent of what these reserves were set up for. So as the city cannot run a deficit, it would be forced to use reserves to fund a shortfall. Now, we've put some funds away from our 2019 surplus to help mitigate any shortfalls from that, from the pandemic. But if we needed excess funds, we would dip into this reserve. So if the city had insufficient reserves available, council could use, like I say, these reserves. And however, if we use those funds, it would trigger a repayment plan into our future years, which would mean potentially increases in future years' taxes. So staff have been working on how to best use the reserves without creating large increases for future years of the plan. And one of the options we came up with was to set a minimum and a maximum balance on these 3 reserves, and those balances would be reviewed every 5 years. So what we've realized in having an annual review of the balance and a minimum balance is that it works really well in a typical year where we have a bit of surplus and we use that surplus to top up those reserves to the minimum balances. And there's no impact to taxes and everything's fine. However, in a year where we need to use it, we are getting kind of a double whammy, if you can say that, with regards to a tax increase, because it puts pressure on on future year's taxes. So for example, for 2021 or 2020, if we used some funds out of the General Financial Stability Reserve, say we used $1 million to offset a deficit, we would need to incorporate a repayment plan into the 2021 to 2025 financial plan. And that would mean a tax increase. So on top of that, we also need to bring it up to its new minimum balance. And so as we don't have a surplus, we would have to have a repayment plan for that as well. So we're getting hit twice on that. So with a review every 5 years will help mitigate that additional hit unless it dropped below the minimum balance. So what we're recommending is a minimum and maximum balance for the General Financial Stability Reserve of $50 million. And that's approximately 55 days of the prior year's general operating expenditures. And we would set our maximum at the 60 days of the prior year's expenditures. For sewer, our minimum balance would be 500. And again, actually the maximum for all three would be 60 days of the prior year's expenditures. And the minimum balance for the water stability reserve would be $1.7 million. And so the 500 for sewer represents just under 50 days of the prior year's expenditures, and the water, the 1.7 for water is just under 60 days, or it's approximately 60 days. So these balances would still put the reserves within the best practice range, and it would leave some funding room that we could use without triggering a repayment plan. So what we're asking council to approve is amending the reserves policy to incorporate both the minimum and maximum balances, and then have a review of those balances every 5 years. That's what we're putting forward.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mercer. Councillor Armstrong?
Move recommendation 1.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. Who wants to speak to it? Councillor Bonner and then Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I may ask a question, because it's probably going to come up later in our meeting. Of the General Financial Stability Reserve, how much have we used it since we're 9 months into this pandemic?
Currently, we have in our draft financial plan, we're using 1.4.
1.4 million?
Yeah.
And my question regarding the Water Financial Stability Reserve is, that's just in case people don't pay their water bills? Am I to understand that?
Not really. It's more to, water is really hard to budget because we're at the mercy of Mother Nature. So if we can have a dry year and our revenues are substantially more than our budget, but if we have a wet year, we might not make our revenue target. So it's more of what kind of weather are we getting rather than people not paying, if that. Some of it is that, but the vast majority of it is how does the weather affect our ability to bill and
So if, I know you're looking at time here, but I think it's important for me to understand is, so does that mean that our budget for our water is based on a dry year and using more water than what the minimum is?
We try to take we look at a long, a multi-year range. And so we're not looking at just necessarily last year, or we try to incorporate a dry and wet year into our budget. I don't know if Ms. Fuller wants to add anything to that.
Good morning, Ms. Fuller.
Good morning. Through the Mayor to Councillor Bonner. So when we go to determine our water revenues, what we do is we have our full water budget for our operating costs, and then I have a spreadsheet that goes back probably 10, 15 years and looks at actual water revenue, and we do look at what our average is. We mark down years where we had a dry year, water restrictions, that sort of thing, and we look to make sure that what we're budgeting is in line with what we would normally collect in an average year, plus whatever our water user rate increase is.
And then I guess since you have all that data, which is fabulous, have we ever dipped into this reserve to the tune of $1.7 million?
We have dipped, we had a different iteration of this reserve in the past, but we have dipped into it in the past, but nowhere near the 1.7. I think 600 might have been the
We
maximum.
had 1 year where there was a challenge.
So if we set that at 1 million and not 1,700, what would happen to the other 700,000 that's in there now? What could we use it for?
This is a little bit different than the general, because it doesn't affect taxes. I guess we could reduce user rates, but I'm
We
not
could
sure.
reduce user rates, we could move it to one of our other water reserves to fund future projects, or we could leave it above, because the maximum suggested balance is 60 days. So even if you reduce the minimum, that doesn't mean we have to take a reserve down to the minimum balance. We just don't want to let a reserve fall below that, and we don't want to go above 60 days. So if you reduce the minimum to 1 million, it doesn't mean we'd have to do anything with the 1.7.
Yeah, and you guys know me in reserves, is if we're not using the money ever, and it's just sitting in the bank, which is fine for some folks, to me that is people's money that they've had to work to earn, and now it's just sitting in the bank and not ever being used. So I think that, we should be shaving these down to what they're needed for, right? And I can certainly understand the general financial stability reserve of where we set it. But again, even through a worldwide pandemic, we've only going into it $2 million. So to me, then there's $13 million in there that, in theory, is just going to stay in the bank. Now, I'm not suggesting we pull $13 million out, but I just think, is it the right number? I know what you guys are going to say, because you say it every time, right? I'm just philosophically.
Ms. Fuller.
Through the mayor to Councillor Bonner, I think the other thing is this isn't just about if there's a revenue shortfall, this could be unexpected expenditures. As you know, this year on Bowen Road, we had a water main break. That was a fairly substantial break. So you just never know on the expenditure side what might come up, and we might need that money to fund that because we won't have the revenue available. So it's not just offsetting potential revenue shortfalls, but unexpected expenditures. And there's been, I think if you go back over the years, there's where we found the coal mine when we were doing that one project a few years ago, and we had a big hole in the ground. We had the break on Bowen Road. So things do come up that we can't anticipate, and this provides that cushion there. It's no different than in your house, you want an emergency fund.
Okay, I don't, but anyway.
I'm always appreciative of Councillor Bonner's initiative around making sure that we keep our rates down, but I must say my immediate reaction is that in the midst of a climate crisis, with the years getting warmer and warmer and the unpredictability of weather patterns, and which would have an effect on consumption, et cetera, I'm going to be more conservative on this. Councillors Hemmens and then Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. So through the current draft financial plan, we're going to be pulling 1.4, did I hear you say, from general financial stability, or 1.7?
Through your worship, yes, it's 1.4 is what we have budgeted to help bring the tax rate down.
Okay, and so my question is, will this policy impact how we repay that?
So with that 1.4, we wouldn't have to repay that because the reserve is currently at 16.4, and so we're bringing it down to the 15, and there is no repayment required.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. And probably an unfair question from Monday night, but it's still sticking with me. Our snow and ice removal went over budget by 200,000-ish. And it's being pulled from reserves, but the reserves to fund that don't have the same repayment as these three primary financial stability reserves. Okay, so that's why we didn't have to calculate in how we repaid that, because we were over 200 or so thousand.
We will keep balances in there, so each year that we will have some cushion in there. So, but they're not as large as these ones.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. I definitely sleep better with a healthy reserve in place. My question is the money, say, like in the water reserve or the sewer reserve, is that invested in, where we put other reserves in low risk sort of financial assets.
Through your worship, to Councillor Gesselbrock, yes. So we are limited in what we can invest in. So we do invest our excess cash flows into investments, and some of them sit in a high interest savings account, and some are term investments. So yes, right now is a challenging environment for our reserves, because several of our investments are coming due this year. And so we're not getting as good a return as we had on the ones that are retiring. So that becomes a bit of a challenge. But yes, our excess reserve funds are invested.
Okay, thanks.
It's all right, Councillor Gesselbrock. The casino's closed. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Ms. Gurry, it occurred to me that we haven't taken a break this morning. I'm wondering if this might be an appropriate time for a 10-minute break.
That would be wonderful, because I was just going to sneak out.
We've been together too long. We'll recess for 10 minutes. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, Leonard Krogh here. I'm here with Karen Lindsay today. She's going to show me how to sign up for our app.
Voyant Alert, the City of Nanaimo's emergency notification system. So we'll start by going into the App Store, Mayor Krogh.
Done.
Next, you're going to hit search. And you're going to search for the app, which is Voyant Alert. So it's V-O-Y-E-N-T. Now you see, it's already selected it. Click there, hit get, and then we're going to install.
And why are we downloading this app?
We're downloading that so that you can get this onto your phone system, and what it will do is it will send you a push notification out. So if the City of Nanaimo issues an emergency alert, it will actually push the notification out onto your phone. The really nice part of this app is that it's anonymous, so it goes by postal code. So we're not requesting you to put your name or personal information in, it just works off of the app through your phone system. There are also, if you have family members or friends that maybe don't have a smartphone or would like another way, you can also sign up online or call our Public Works Department, and they have phone and texting options available as well. So there's lots of options for people depending on what their needs are.
Fabulous. So you can rest with some comfort knowing you can find out what's necessary and know that people who are important to you are notified.
Absolutely. So now you have Voyant Alert on your phone. And now just select open. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to tap in the postal code that it's prompting you.
All right. So
you just click on there and start entering. And then find on a map. So here you'll see the welcome page for the City of Nanaimo, and you want to subscribe to notifications, yes?
Yes.
Click that you agree to the terms, so click both to the yes for consent, and then hit next. And it's going to ask to either allow or not allow notifications, and you want to always allow.
Always allow.
Always allow. And the reason that is, if you don't allow, it won't push the notification out to you. So always allow.
Always allow.
And now you see here, you've got a message to accept that you've signed out. That's the two-factor authentication, and you're going to tap yes. And now you're in the system. Also, when you have a moment, we recommend that you pick your locations and sign up based on those locations, and then you'll get alerts from the City of Nanaimo.
Karen, thank you. Everyone, sign up.
Hey, Tiana. Hey. This sure is the coldest rink in town.
Oh, yeah, buddy!
Nice save, James!
Wow, your goalie is keeping you guys in the game. Cheers.
Oh, man, that's hot.
Sorry, that's the way I like it. Oh. Go, 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 go! Penalty shot!
Scalds from hot drinks are a leading cause of hospitalization for children under 5.
2 minutes, down in the front, unsportsmanlike conduct.
Hot tea and coffee will cause serious burns to a child in less than a second.
Got a kid? Use the lid.
This is the 2018 redux of the lighting at Nanaimo's historic bastion. I've had the pleasure of being part of the relighting project on this amazing building in downtown Nanaimo. So what we did is we've replaced the original high-pressure sodium lights, which basically did an okay job of lighting up the bottom 10 feet of the building, and replaced them with modern LED lighting that has the capacity to change color. We can run through a number of different colors that we have pre-programmed here in a pink, a purple, a green. Probably my favorite on here is Rainbow Chase for Pride Week. It'll actually run all the way around the building all the time.
With this new technology, organizations can now request that the bastion be lit to promote their cause by going to the City Nanaimo website and following the instructions. Go to Your Government, Bastion Lighting Requests, complete the lighting request form, and submit. You will hear from us within a couple days if your request has been approved, and the bastion will be lit in the colors that you have requested. If you have any questions, please contact the Mayor's office at 250-755-4400.
So the next time you're in downtown Nanaimo at night, come on and check out the new dynamic lighting at the Bastion.
We're here today to make a couple street names. There was some vandalism in town, and we're just going to make a replacement. In the roads today, we're doing our Dundas Street and Bruce Avenue. They're all 8-inch, and we use 3 different sizes, mostly 24-inch, 32-inch, and 36-inch. We do use a consistent font with street names. This is actually my metal blank, so the only material here is the material that I actually will cut out in vinyl. From here, we have to take out the vinyl that's not needed, which is the outer. So all we want to do is save the inside border. From here, we actually have to put a transfer tape on it. And what this does is it allows us to take the blue vinyl and pull it away from the clear backing that it's on so we can apply it to our aluminum blank. Now that we have our 2-sheeted piece of vinyl, we take our aluminum blank, which has high intensity diamond grade, which you can see behind me. We have all different colors. We have orange, yellow, white, depending on the type of signs. Most of our white signs are regulatory, and the yellow ones are warning signs. And right here, all I'm doing is pushing the transfer tape a little tighter to the vinyl. And then from there, we peel it back, our plastic, which basically leaves us with a big sticker. We put it on the aluminum. And when we're done here, we take our transfer tape off, and as you can see, we're left with Dundas.
The next item will be council expenses for the 9 months ending September 30th, 2020. And Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Your Worship. So like you said, this is a report for the expenditures to date for council at September 30th, 2020. And it's a lot lower than normal because COVID has impacted everybody's ability to travel and go to conferences. So we're nowhere near previous year's levels of spending. So it's just for information, and this information has been distributed to all councillors, but if there is any questions you have, Mr. Bailey and I are here to answer any questions.
I don't think so. It's a good news story for the good citizens of Nanaimo that We're saving some money. The bad news is, however, we are not gathering in the same way and perhaps having the same influence at the political level or learning as much as we normally would. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. So my question is, what the excess balance, what happens with that?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Turley, that goes into reducing any deficit we have. So
Thank you.
It doesn't get reserved or anything.
Okay.
There's no reserves. Thank you very much, Ms. Mercer. The next is operating results for the 9 months ending September 30th, 2020.
All right, so as you stated, the purpose of this is to tell you where we're at as of September 31st with regards to our projections for the end of the year. So this report gives the day-to-day operations as well as operating projects. Now, there's just one line on the report for operating projects. All the detail will come in the project report that's coming next. So it kind of goes without saying the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly affected the city. And as a result, we are projecting a small deficit in the general and water funds and a small surplus in the sewer fund. At the end of Q2, we were projecting a $2.98 million deficit for all three funds. But with the passage of time since Q2 was out, we have better information on how the city is impacted by COVID, and that the projected deficit has been significantly reduced. And staff have taken steps to mitigate the deficit by repositioning Parks and Rec staff to fill seasonal and vacancies in other departments rather than hiring temps and casuals. We only filled vacancies in critical situations, and there was instituted cost-saving measures at the Vancouver Island Conference Centre. So the management team here has been very proactive about implementing cost savings measures, so that's helped us. And we've cut expenditures where we could, so such as the obvious ones are travel and conferences, but with space rentals and service contracts. So where we could, we have reduced expenditures. And staff will continue to look for and implement cost savings measures where appropriate. And so included in today's agenda, the last report of the day is an information report on the $6.693 million we received from the COVID-19 Safe Restart Grant for local governments. That grant is not included in this report, that money was received after the report was completed, and we also need council's approval on a funding strategy for that money. So again, it is not included in here. So the deficit is made up of the following. So the three funds before other allocations had a $937,000 surplus, and that's made up of general of just over $1 million surplus, sewer $134,000 surplus, and water had a small deficit of $209,000. In addition to these three items, we also account for the loss for disposal of assets that happened during the year. And so normally what happens is surplus covers any cost of the disposal of our capital assets each year. And we've used an average over the last 5 years, which is, so we've assumed $700,000 will need to be used to fund asset disposals. And we also have to fund our post-employment benefit allocation for the year, and that is also $700,000. So the net result is a general deficit of $388,200, sewer a small surplus of $134,200, and again, water has a small deficit of $209. So the bigger, I'll just kind of touch on some of the bigger items, but attachment 1 gives a brief description of the variances we had over $100,000, and attachment 2 gives an overview of all variances for all departments. So some of the bigger items in the general fund. So like I mentioned in Q2, the RCMP surplus, or the RCMP severance dispute was settled, and each municipality was billed for their portion of that settlement. And our accrual, which the information is supplied by the RCMP, was short by approximately $1.5 million. So we had to take that into our financial statements this year. And that was for a period of 2013 to 2020. So still ongoing is the retro pay negotiations, and that represents 2017 to present. So we also accrue for that with information provided by the RCMP, which hopefully is better than their estimate for the severance. And we will, at the end of the year, have an update on costing for that, and we will accrue the appropriate amount. So that one's still ongoing, but the severance has been settled, and that cost us approximately $1.5 million more than we had anticipated. Casino revenues, as the casinos aren't open, we are not receiving any revenue, so that projection hasn't changed from quarter two. We're short $655,000. Internal orders related to the COVID response costs we're estimating at just under $633,000, and that's up about $165,000 from our estimate at quarter two. Parking operations are better than we had originally thought. So parking is now estimated at being short about $118,800. So that's better than we had originally projected at quarter two by about $285,000. Parks, Rec, and Culture operations we're expecting about a $1.3 million surplus there. And that is, again, better than our quarter two projection, as we now have facilities open and we know we're getting better at navigating the pools and arenas, and we have a better idea of what kind of revenue is coming in. So that's projecting to be a bit better. Building inspections and business license revenues, we're expecting just under $330,000 more than budgeted. And again, that's better than we originally projected at quarter two. We have a Sun Life reduction in benefits of $250,000, and again, there's no change from quarter two on that. We also received $92,000 for our 2018 WCB core audit rebate that they were holding on to that till some, I guess, paperwork was done. So we received that in the third quarter, and so that's an addition. And the remaining variance is made up of vacancies and other small variances throughout the organization. So that's it for general. Sewer is generally, we have more revenue than expected, and that contributes to the surplus there. For water, our water user fee revenues are down by, we're estimating $344,000. We still haven't finished billing all of our summer accounts because it's on a staggered 4-month moving. So we haven't finished that. So that number may be reduced. We may have a better revenue than we are projecting at this point. And that is offset by $100,000 in contingency that we have in that fund. And that makes up the $209,000 deficit there. And so that's, in a nutshell, kind of the higher level overview of the operations at the end of Q3. And I can take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Ms. Mercer, and I want to point out, not obviously to council who understands this or staff who are present, but the community in general, that the good news is the deficit's been reduced with the hard work of staff, but what this translates into is not cold figures on a page or in a presentation to council. It translates into a lot of people having to shift their jobs. It translates into people who are not working, or in small contractors who provided services in recreation, for example, who didn't get hired this year, whose family budgets were impacted accordingly, whose kids maybe don't get the benefits that they would have received with a working parent. And in turn, those people were not in a position to go out and support the many businesses in this community that are struggling through COVID. So on one hand, I just use this as a reminder to the public that being able to get to a balanced budget is a great thing, and it's important, and the city has to do it by law anyway. But having said that, this is not without its real impact on human beings and the citizens and our fellow citizens in this community. Councillors Turley and Gesselbrock, in that order.
No, I did.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Great, thank you, Worship. Through you to Ms. Mercer. Just a really quick question with the reduced water usage. Just given the more people at home, like, do you think, do we differentiate between residential usage and usage in commercial, industrial uses? Like,
through your worship to Councillor Gesselbrock, no, it's just there are different accounts for, obviously, for residential and business and industrial, but in this, we're not differentiating. We haven't done an analysis on that.
And would you say that's probably the deficit's more to do with climate related, just sort of the weather that we had this year and less with COVID? Or do you think that it's like just a lack of use of water because of slowdowns with COVID?
I think there's a combination of things. I think there is some conservation in there. I think COVID probably has had a bigger impact on businesses. If they're closed, they're not using their water. We had a wet start to our summer. So all of those things kind of impacted. I wouldn't say there's one that stood out over others. I think the weather generally has a bigger impact on whether we meet budget or we don't.
Yep. Great, thanks.
Councillor Armstrong.
I just have a question on the RCMP pay, because I'm estimating probably it's going to be at least over 2 million. So do we have that money put aside?
Yes, through you, Councillor Armstrong, yes. So we have that money put aside, and we build every year, we add to it. So every year that they haven't settled, we add another additional amount to it. And I'm not sure exactly what we have in the reserve right now, but it is several $1 million, I believe. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. As I've said before in the other reports that we got, the fact that we are in this financial position, I think, is due to the hard work of not only staff, but past administrations and past councils. So thank you for that. When I usually read the financial statements, unlike I don't read books this way, but I usually go to the bottom line. And so if I am to understand correctly here, after all that's happened, at the end of December, we'll have $134,000 surplus?
In the sewer fund, yes. The other two will be zero, because we will need to dip into, for general, we'll need to dip into the stability reserve a little bit, or the 2.8 million, I guess, we've put aside in the special initiatives reserve for COVID. So we'll dip into that by 388,000, and we'll dip a little bit into the water, we'll need to offset the water deficit by a reserve transfer as well. So, but yes, after everything's said and done, all three funds will come out at $134,000 surplus. That's what we're estimating.
Okay, so that's including general and all that sort of thing. So in terms of the city's, our position, where are we going to be in terms of, will it be $134,000 ahead, or will it be behind?
So overall, so the three funds, we've lumped them together, but they're very three separate entities. So as far as taxation, that comes through the general fund, we'll need about $388,000 out of the 2.8 million we set aside. So in the grand scheme of things, that's a really good position to be in. The water and sewer funds, they are their own entities, and the sewer will have a bit of money that will go to their reserves, and water will take a bit from their reserves. So overall, I think we are in good shape.
Okay.
That answers your question?
It does, because I want to talk about that in our next part.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Rudolph. It looks like a lot of our savings were sort of with a hiring freeze as well, and I'm just curious, sort of like, are we running pretty lean right now, and has that sort of had an impact in sort of our capacity, sort of with those measures?
Through the mayor to Councillor Gesselbrock, staffing is a complicated conversation because we have so many different suites of staff and deployed in different operations. So every staff position that becomes vacated, there's an email I receive asking for a replacement if it's essential. There's usually a time gap in that, so we're gapping a fair amount in terms of our replacement. So. And some positions have been left vacant. The one area that we probably need to talk about, and obviously through budget, is the recreation portfolio. So it didn't get mentioned in this presentation, but we have had a Bevan pool closed for all year, and that is a significant fiscal issue. So that put us, just because we're in landing in on paper, a fiscal adequate spot going into budget. We need to understand how that goes into next year and what assumptions you're going to draw on in terms of our service delivery. So as the Mayor said, we're not sending people to conferences and so on. There's a lot of Zooming going on, I guess you could say that. So there's pros and cons to this. So we're saving money, but we're not actually able to do a lot of the business that we normally do. So on the staffing side, generally speaking, we are fine, and we are bringing forward some positions for consideration as part of the council discussion, but most of those have been pushed off and are not in budget for next year, and with the exception of the RCMP positions and ones that were been previously identified in budgets, and otherwise we're not going forward with any further positions. So I think we're fine. We have some pressure points. Finance is one of them, and that's one of the areas that you'll see. And it just seems to be a mad rush for Finance Department all the time to go through these huge waves of budget and then year end and then tax time. These are big events, and we never really talk about them, but this taxes, if I can use that word, the department substantially. And same with the Recreation Department's had an extraordinarily busy year in trying to find a way to manage this. It's been a taxing year, and we're just trying to make sure that we stick to our knitting, be as solid as we can on the things we have to do, and then, of course, then work on the other initiatives. So as we saw this morning, there's always new initiatives coming forward, and we have to be able to incorporate that in. But it's to get to a place where it's as simple as it sounds, it's been a lot of work. And I'm not overstating that, but yeah, we're pedaling as hard as we can.
Follow up on that. So I guess sort of in our budget process, we go to the business cases for each department. We'll kind of have the sort of discussion on staffing a bit more in depth.
Yes, Your Worship. It may be a question that each department could comment on in terms of, because we actually at a management table have this conversation on a weekly basis. Where are we at? How's it going? What's this new thing with COVID doing this week? And all this, how it's an ongoing balancing act. And so I think it's fair to ask that question, especially, I think it will be a central feature in some of the departments.
Nothing further. Thank you very much. And Ms. Mercer, on to project results for the 9 months ending September 30th, 2020.
Thank you, Your Worship. I promise this is my last one. This listing includes both operating and capital projects and their status at September 30th, 2020. Projects are broken down into the 4 status categories of completed or substantially complete, in progress, not started, or delayed, or other. So that's how the report is set out. Our total budget is about 90.8 million. Capital makes up about 75 of that, and operating 15. So it's the lion's share of that is capital projects. And the spend to date is about 55.5 million, and that's about 62% of the total budget. And capital is approximately 47 million, and operating is about 8.5. So the 62% spend is on par with where we were last year at the same quarter, and that leaves the remaining funds available at 35 million, 28 for capital, and 6.8 for operating. So we are like I say, 62% spent. Attachment 1 gives an overview listing of all of the projects in each of their status categories. So the GM's directors are here from the various departments to answer any questions you may have about specific projects.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. When we had this report 3 months ago, I mentioned what I thought was an imbalance in projects not being started or canceled that were of a active transportation nature, bicycling, sidewalks, that sort of thing. And I was told it was just the beginning of the year and that some of these things hadn't started but will be starting. I didn't have time to go through this line by line to compare it to my last list, but I was wondering if maybe Mr. Sims, if through Your Worship, might be able to let me know how some of those active transportation projects are advancing.
Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I think we can say that most of the projects are now underway, and a number of tenders have been released over the course of the fall. We've still got a few tenders in the 2020 budget to be released here in late November and early December. And probably the most notable one would be Front Street, which is a very significant piece for active transportation. But we didn't want to get that one out too early. Wanted to keep the disruption over the winter and then pave as soon as we could in the spring. But I think we've caught up with all the projects that were in the project plan as far as active transportation is concerned.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
I just wanted to thank staff. I think these look really good to me, especially the fact that we could save that 1.2% tax increase there to offset. I think that's excellent. So thank you very much for all your work on this. Really appreciate it.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. Sims. I was just curious, with the capital projects, has sort of the COVID effect had any delayed on the process of things?
It's a good question, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Gesselbrock. I think we saw a bit of a speed wobble early on, where there was some uncertainty. How's the market going to respond? How's our supply chain? But staff were able to, just take a breath for a bit and recovered fairly quickly. Especially the project management staff, both in engineering, public works, and also in parks and rec. I think we've seen some interesting responses as well. So capacity-wise, we've kept up with our original project plan, I guess, is the bottom line. The other interesting thing is that some of the projects have been fairly competitive. Some of the tenders that we've received have been fairly competitive. We've had some very good pricing on a few projects, not all of them, but most of our projects are coming in 2 to 6% under budget. But there's a few notable exceptions which were surprising. Overall, I think we're in good shape from a capital projects point of view.
Great, thanks.
Anyone else? Thank you very much, Ms. Mercer. We're on to the next item, which is J, and that is the COVID-19 Safe Restart Grant for local governments.
Thank you.
Ms. Legan.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to start by saying that for those of you that aren't familiar with the structure, with staff, Laura has the position of financial officer for the city, and that's why it's so appropriate for her to present in detail the financial position, and she also has immediate direct reports who can provide additional in-depth answers to some of your questions. I'm going to take on the function to be more of the strategic financial advisor on this. So I want to position it that way, that this is a strategic way to deal with this financial scenario where days after we cut the 2021-25 draft financial budget, we received the letter. And so all of the documentation and the months of work, it just was not feasible to go back and to augment that information. So it does not contain the $6.693 million. The COVID Restart Grant of $6.693 million has very specific criteria with respect to expending that funding. Strategically, we have an opportunity with the significant revenue shortfalls, particularly with parks and recreation, casino revenues, parking revenues, as well as costs that we've incurred with addressing the pandemic clean team, some of the support that we've provided to the community with respect to safety patrols and other efforts will far exceed the $6.693 million. And we certainly can, as indicated in the information report, draw down that $6.693 million against the eligible criteria in 2020. That creates an opportunity for all of Mayor and Council to actually have an unallocated capacity, which would be a variance in 2021, moving through to the Strategic Initiatives Fund, We've also not had to draw down the full $2.89 million that we put into reserve based on the uncertainty of the pandemic back in April. We've had to draw down on a projected basis right now $388,000. Remember that the information presented by Ms. Mercer is a Q3 projected position for the city end of Q4. And so we could be higher or lower than a $134,000 on a net basis for all three funds. We anticipate that we will be at least in that good of a position. So there is an opportunity here to deal with some of the modifications, some of the trade-offs, some of the position that we had to take to manage without the knowledge that we would have the $6.693 million, and to cycle back and draw it down. So part of it would be listed on page 218 of your package, some suggested costs that would, and revenue losses that would be used to draw it down in 2020. And you can see that we've had substantial parking revenue shortfalls. We do need to keep our parking reserve funded. Parkades are expensive to maintain, and they're also important for businesses in our community to have the capacity and to have them maintained appropriately, as well as surface parking. We use the casino revenues both for reduction of taxes through the general revenue top-up, as well as 67% into the strategic infrastructure reserve. So we could effectively replace that if that's the will of council. You can see that the revenue shortfalls have been substantial with respect to aquatics, arenas, and recreation. That alone will draw down a large portion of the 6.6. And then there's been some initiatives taken by the city to serve the citizens well, particularly the water safety team that was put in place for the outdoor swimming facilities, the facility ambassadors. When we opened the pop-up taxation at Frank Crane, we wanted to make it a reasonable experience for citizens, so we provided staff there. As well as we have seen an increase in online shopping, unfortunately, and a lot of cardboard and that sort of thing with respect to sanitation costs. And then we've had extra staff through overtime. We've got extra wages and tipping fees. So all of those costs and revenue shortfalls would effectively draw down the $6.693 million against eligible criteria, therefore forcing a variance into 2021. And just for your information, we thought we'd put out some ideas with respect to knowing what we have put into the 2021-2025 financial draft financial plan, some of the challenges coming up, as well as the surge experienced right now with respect to COVID and the uncertainty of the persistence of the pandemic going into 2021, and continuing with a prudent financial management philosophy with the city and providing some opportunity to set aside some of that variance into 2021. So Ms. Mercer mentioned that $1.4 million of the financial stability reserve had been used to build the 2021-25 financial plan. We are now advising with respect to the $6.693 million COVID restart grant that we actually use it, a portion, $1.4 million, and reserve the $1.4 million above the $15 million general financial stability reserve that was voted on earlier for 2022 pandemic persistence, in case we do not see a reopening of our facilities and the revenues return to the levels that they need to be at for us to effectively, in some of our operations, lose less money. This particular facility, VICC, we've cut costs dramatically, but we certainly are going to be a long road to revenue reestablishment for it. So there is still some carryover and hangover that we're going to see as this pandemic persists. So some of the recommendations that we have for your consideration through the budgeting process. So I think that looking at this as just a strategy going forward, and then being fully informed with the November 25th, 27th, 30th, 4th, 7th, and 9th. With respect to budget deliberations, you will have a lot better information, and you'll be able to make decisions in the fullness of all of the pressures and all of the opportunities that are presented. Right now, we feel strongly that we need to put some reserves into 2022 with respect to the persistence of the pandemic. That would be the 1.4 million. We do think we need to fund a pandemic internal order. This could be used for multiple community requests, as well as our staff need to continue with the personal protective equipment. Our city staff, particularly those that are in sanitation and on the streets providing services, are continually using masks and other protective equipment, as well as fire and some police costs there. When we built the 2021-25 budget, we took a very conservative approach to new positions. And what we did was we didn't bring forward all the new positions we thought that we needed, the strategic gaps, because we knew we were faced with a really tough position going forward. And we wanted to bring our initial cut from a 6% tax increase down to a 3%. So we pushed out first of all, we allocated the 1.4 million, and then we pushed out the start of the new RCMP positions into September. We pushed out the 3 approved positions from the 2020-24 budget to a July 1st start. So we would recommend that you give consideration during the budget deliberation to bring those to a January 1 start using the COVID restart funding opportunity there, recognizing that it is a long-term cost with positions, but we would be able to bring that forward. Extending the clean team into 2021, we don't currently have funding for the clean team. We know it's an important function within the city, given the scenario that we're facing, and we're looking to fund them for the full year. Downtown public safety was a topic of discussion earlier today. We're recommending that potentially COVID restart funds be used to provide some support there, as well as contingency for the rainy day. We don't know how long that we're going to experience the revenue shortfalls with the pandemic's persistence going the wrong way currently, but we could be optimistic into mid-2021, but we're not sure. As well, we did cut $1 million in contingency and in condition index funding, as well as about $500,000 of that 1 million in projects to get the initial budget that we cut down to a 3% taxation increase. We don't have any funds in that budget, draft budget in front of you for 2021, or in your inboxes 2021-25 for business cases. So we still need some capacity to fund any approved business cases going forward, and the COVID-19 Restart Grant could address some of the business cases which are specific to some of the economic and social gains that we could experience as a city if we moved forward with them. So in a nutshell, the suggestion here as an information note is let's consider from a strategic financial perspective creating as much capacity for council, mayor and council allocation of that 6.693 million without having the eligibility criteria carry forward, because we know we can draw down against it very specifically in 2020 and push the Special Initiatives Reserve funding forward, which could be a substantial amount of money. And putting substantial in perspective, 6.693 million on our overall budget is still only about a 3.4% amount, I guess, of our overall almost $200 million operating in capital. I'm happy to take questions. Laura, Wendy, all of SLT, all of us met, and we built this strategy for you, for your consideration together. So this is the group's perspective, and we're certainly open to comments and would be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lagan. Appreciate the report. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I have a question on the 1.4 million to offset taxes. Would that then mean we would be at a starting point of 1.6%?
That's not what we're proposing. We're still proposing 3. So what we're suggesting is that the COVID restart, so the COVID restart grant fully expensed in 2020 would push a variance into 2021, which would be used in replacement of the 1.4 million, therefore preserving the 1.4 million for 2022 pandemic. So it would still be what we're suggesting here is still be a 3%.
Is there any way to lower that number? Because we've got many of our households that aren't going to be able to afford significant property tax increases.
That is an opportunity for council to consider.
So that money could be used for that purpose.
Yes.
So we could technically start at a 0% if we applied that COVID money. Is that correct?
So we would have to expense the COVID restart grant against eligible expenses, therefore pushing the capacity to address exactly what you're saying in 2021.
So that would be like police, bylaws, those positions. Could that be used for that purpose since that's part of the grant money?
Yes.
Okay.
It's cleanest if we expense it in 2020 against the eligible criteria and push the variance into 2021. That's the.
No, you guys know what you're doing. I just wanted to ask that question. If you think that's the clean way of doing it, then that's probably the best way to do it. So.
And it doesn't change any of your options with respect to how you use a fund, how you use the $3 or $4 million.
Thank you.
It would result.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I appreciate the report and understand that the information you received after most of the report was written. But so the 6.69 million is good news. The first thing I took away from page 217 on the report was the eligible costs, because we are constrained to some extent on how we can use that money. And then I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly on page 218 under 2020 revenue shortfalls. When I did a quick rough calculation of those totals, that to me comes out to very close to $9 million, which is obviously $2.5 million more than the grant money that we're getting. And that's not taking into account applying anything against reserves or taxation or the cleanup team or anything else. So it just seems to me that we've got some still very tough decisions ahead of us in terms of how we want to use this money. So certainly we'll be wanting to spread it around as wisely as possible and relying on staff advice, which we're starting to get today, and I appreciate that. Thank you. But I am reading that correctly.
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Thorpe, you are reading it correctly, and it is consistent with the April 2020 information that we projected when the pandemic hit, that we would be about $9 million short in revenue. So it has been fairly consistent. The legacy of the experience of our finance staff is incredible, and they're able to provide excellent advice to council.
Thank you.
Sobering commentary. Councillor Himmins.
Thank you, Your Worship. Excuse me. Given that one of the eligibility criteria deals with vulnerable populations, and we're about to get some hefty recommendations from our task force, and we know homelessness is at the forefront of so many issues we're dealing with as a community, was any consideration given to flagging some potential of these funds for the work that will be coming from the task force? And if not, why not?
So I might turn it over to Mr. Rudolph, but just by way of answer from a finance perspective, we're trying to create unallocated capacity for exactly those decisions.
Mr. Rudolph.
Your Worship, both task forces, the Economic Development and the Health and Housing, have not been received formally by council, their recommendations, so we weren't able to, and I don't think the work is quite complete on the governance side for both initiatives, so it was hard to program that into anticipated costs, so it could be a conversation. There is an opportunity to utilize some of these funds for those purposes. Just back to Councillor Armstrong's notion of reducing taxes, we have to understand that this is a 2 to 3 year span of consequences. So decisions you're going to make on the use of these funds and other things will definitely impact 2022. So if we use grant money to bring in positions, let's just say into next year's budget, then we have to fund that under the taxation side for 2022. So it's a short-term relief, but we're actually then have to build that into a 2022. So throughout all your deliberations that you'll have over many of these days, you probably should be thinking of this as at least a 2-year, 21 and 22 consequence. So what is the consequence of making these decisions for next year into the following year? And there may not be an answer. It depends on what the issue is. So today was just get it on the table. We've done a quick assessment of what it could be used for. Obviously, council is going to decide how this is a good news problem. But we had, in order to build the budget the way we did, we had to draw down a lot of initiatives and push out a little bit some of the capital. And I just remind you that we didn't do we don't even have a recreation guide out there. We're not providing all those services that we normally would provide. When will we do that? Same with the Bevan Pool. Not open, big assumption around opening that at some point in time or not. That's a fundamental piece of your budget conversations next year. And then we have all these other issues to deal with. And we saw some examples. There's never a shortage of asks and needs that are all legitimate in different ways. So we're not asking you to get, it's great to get as many questions on the table as possible, but it's also food for thought as you then get into your review of your budget materials. And next week we present through 2 full days all the goings on of all the service areas of the city, so you get a refresh of everything that's on the go and in front of you and behind the scenes to keep it working. And then you get into your budget conversation about this is unpacking where we're at and so on. So no pressure today whatsoever. Just kind of take it under advisement, think about it. And if we can answer any questions between now and then, please send us the emails or ask us. But certainly I think the goal is to give you enough time throughout this next 2 months to get your head around what you're comfortable with and where you land. So it's I use a 2% plus 1. So we were actually at a 2% budget of operating and capital and a 1% for asset management. To me, that is the reality. So we're actually, it adds up to 3.
Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you. A follow-up, if I may. So just to put this in layman's terms, this is a good news problem to have. We have $6 million extra. Staff have presented us with some possibilities of using that money to cover some of our shortfalls that were resulting from COVID. And in doing so, that will, in theory, free up finances next year because we're not going to be paying back these deficits in next year's budget. And so there is an opportunity next year to look at funding things like recommendations that come from ECDEV or Health and Housing. Is that accurate?
It's close.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So directionally correct, as I like to say, absolutely. So we're not projecting a significant shortfall for 2020 because of the management to date, as mentioned, and some of the tough decisions that have had to be taken and the impacts in the community that were out of our control with respect to trying to come in on budget as required. What we can do is expense the COVID Restart Grant against the shortfalls in revenues, over $9 million, some of our COVID-related expenses, and push capacity into 2021. So the only slight change there is that it's not funding, this will not fund a deficit, it will fund eligible shortfalls. So we're actually not projecting a deficit. And so we're in a unique position as a city. Some of the really difficult financial positions of other cities is because of transit shortfall, parking shortfall, and very tourism-dependent places. So we have a little bit different financial picture, which will give us some capacity in 2021 to address the recommendations of the task forces, which haven't come forward and may or not be appropriate, but that's the will of council going forward.
Thank you.
But capacity that would not have been there otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I certainly appreciate the work staff's put into this. I have to tell you right up front, when I read it, I was kind of hit the roof a bit because I guess I didn't understand exactly where you're coming from on this. So in my own layman terms, what we're going to do is, we've already been told that Parks and Recreation culture are basically breaking even. We were told that a few months ago, that is like we made $30,000 even though we didn't have anything open. That was my understanding from that, is because our costs and our revenues were kind of basically leveling out. So in that case, we would be looking at the better part of almost $3.7 million available in overage in the Parks and Recreation culture as a surplus. So we'd be generating a surplus there. We'd be generating a surplus in our parking revenues as well. That's what I'm following through this, right? So we're generating these surpluses, and then we're going to take those surpluses and put it into a fund that we can access without limits set to us by the federal government.
Yes. Yes, that is the strategy.
Okay. Now I love you all really much, because that's exactly what I was going to say, because I didn't see that in this when it was right there, right? My question here is, do we have to, I know parking is important, and we've just done a lot of work on our parking garage downtown. I'm going to start nitpicking at the numbers now. Do we need to put $469,000 in the reserve, or can we just find a way to make it a surplus, or put it into a reserve that's going to be used for housing initiatives? And my concern is, I started writing these things down on what we got here, like Health and Housing Task Force is in theory looking at a 3-year recommendation in the neighborhood of $600,000 a year, and that could be paid out of this for 3 years. We just got an ask this morning for another $600,000 for 3 years. That could easily be paid for out of this as well, and still have money left over. We still don't have enough shelters in our city, where only 15% of the people on the street are actually in shelters. And I can't see that the province or the feds are going to start coughing up a bunch of money on that, especially when they just gave us $6.6 million specifically to help out with that, because that is one of the criteria. So do we have a number that is going to be showing up in a reserve that we have access to spend? I have to be careful, because I noticed that the paper's quoting me on my jokes sometimes. So it'll be in a reserve that we're able to access specifically for these type of projects that are coming up.
Through the mayor to Councillor Bonner. The directionally correct again, absolutely. I think one of the things that is, one of the decisions in front of council as we move forward with our 2021-25 financial plan deliberations is adherence to reserve policy. So reserve top-up policy, which has been bylaw, which has been passed prior, and decisions that are taken. The recommendations in this information report are for your consideration. We are absolutely open to, as staff, in supporting the will of mayor and council moving forward against the priorities that you've set, against the strategic plan, as well as the really large operational large operational imperative of the city moving forward. So the vast majority of the operational budget is allocated to maintaining service levels for the citizens of Nanaimo. So this gives a small percentage of unallocated opportunity to address new initiatives, exactly as you're saying, unencumbered, so not having to have it match the federal through the province eligibility criteria. So you're directionally absolutely correct. And I wanted to mention, we're suggesting here that this could be a prudent use of the funds, but they are suggestions.
Okay. And do we have a number that, like, because literally what's going to happen here, if we were to go with these suggestions, we're going to have a very large surplus during a pandemic. I mean, I'm just trying to look at the optics of that as well.
So I would, I hesitate with the term surplus, unfortunately. So it was through some really difficult decisions and the leadership of Mayor, Council, and the leadership of administration that put us in a solid financial position before the COVID restart grant landed. And so you would be sitting here saying, great, break even, no strong variance going into the next year. This has created an opportunity, a variance opportunity for the city. Calling it a surplus, from my perspective, tends to give it less boundary. And so I think that the intention here is to progress initiatives underway, progress the strategic plan, and stay consistent with the priorities. So I think everyone is saying the same thing, but it is certainly not a windfall for the city to be used beyond. We think we have more in the pipeline than 6.693 million, and these task force recommendations are part of that pipeline.
Okay. Do you know when we'll be making final decisions on this?
That's the million-dollar question.
So we will not get our audited financial statements until later, I think May of 2021, so we'll know the exact number, but we will have directionally again a very significant confidence level in the variance. So going into this year, 2020, we knew the 2019 variance was about $2.8 million. You took the decision in the Special Initiatives Fund to put it aside to mitigate the unknown around the pandemic. And we can take the variance early in the year and give it a structure with respect to what can be used and allocated across each of the different priorities. And it'll be close, but we won't have absolute final until mid-year because of the cycle of budgeting and financial statements, and then final approval of the 2021, 2025 budget or financial plan. And I'm just going to ask Laura if she wants to add any technical correction to that. I'm happy to have her support.
Just add to, we always bring back, we'll call it a surplus report. In this case, it's kind of a negative term in this context, in late February, early March, so we would know what that surplus actually is and how we could allocate it at that point. We'll know in February what that is, and then that still leaves us time to incorporate funding into the 2021-2025 financial plan for any initiatives that Council chooses to bring up.
If I may wax politically just for a second, I think this is a golden opportunity for this council and this city to actually make some serious dents in our health and housing issues that we have in our city. And I would certainly be looking to have that money help us on that trail. Like this is a golden opportunity. I would not want to see it squandered whatsoever. Thank you. Not that we're going to squander it, but we should take advantage of it.
Well, I'm glad the penny dropped for Councillor Bonner, but I think what today's debate has also shown that it's always prudent not to be commenting about what we may hear from staff in terms of understanding and create expectations or views in the public that might not be supported by the information we actually receive at Council. And so it's always good to keep our debates in public and our powder dry until we know what we're dealing with. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. So just to be clear, the grant that's being received, do we need to make a decision to put whatever the variance is into the Special Initiatives Reserve, or is that going to be done automatically? Like when is this money received, and when can we start sort of having discussion of how it's best allocated?
Your Worship, my understanding is that we will be receiving, if we haven't already received the money, it is forthcoming. So the second part of your question was?
I guess as we're going through this budgeting process, will we see this, the appearance of this money sort of in the special initiatives reserve as we're making our decisions to just sort of see what we're working with, or?
So on November 30th, we will be, budget day, we will be bringing this back for discussion in more detail. So that will inform how we allocate any budget variance or surplus for 2020.
Yeah, and I think that is a really important point that's made, is that we've had to make some serious management decisions and decisions on how to cut costs to make up for the revenue shortfalls. And I think that characterizing this money as a surplus is a very large mischaracterization. I think it's important to understand it as a variance and what that means in terms of moving forward. So thank you.
If I may add to Ms. Mercer, through Mayor, the key would be to have a motion to use the $6.693 million to address the revenue shortfalls and the pandemic-specific expenses in 2020 to push the variance. That would be a key decision that would likely need to occur. And Ms. Mercer can give me a technical nod before year end. And then you have the unallocated and fewer eligibility criteria constraints to deal with the opportunities and some of the issues that are persistent. And we're still going into 2021. We're going to have more information before we do the final approval of the 2021-25 budget with respect to this persistence of the pandemic and what would be effectively unallocated and not put into a risk mitigation strategy, which we will continue to advise council. Some portion should still remain unallocated for 2022 and beyond. And one of the strategies, just to bring it full circle now, from the earlier presentation on the general financial stability reserve of capping it at 15 million is to preserve yet another 1.4 million moving forward into 2022 for the pandemic. So I think it's important. You're going to have more levers at your disposal in 2021 than would have been available without this very positive change in our financial position with the COVID Restart Grant.
And just to follow up, those recommendations will be presented to us, to council.
We'll build them through the 25th and 27th and bring back decision points on the 30th and 4th, I believe, is the 4th. So I think the 27th is a Friday, and we needed to give our staff some time to come back with all the decision points around budget deliberations. And this Restart Grant will be part of that decision, but it doesn't have to be allocated to every dollar doesn't have to be allocated. That's where the Special Initiatives Reserve gives you the runway, the time into 2021 to allocate as you see fit at Mayor and Council's priorities.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much to Council for working hard to keep us within 3 hours, basically, or almost. 3 hours and 5 minutes or 6 minutes, depending which clock I'm looking at. There being no other business, a motion for adjournment would be appreciated. Moved Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Gesselbrock. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Well done.